Could have been several million in total value. That was 1970 money. That's 8, 9, 10 times today's money. So who knows? It could have been a $15 million lick. There was only like 5 police reports filed. There were some non-criminals who went. Some successful black doctor, I think, was one, and he filed a police report.
This ain't like sticking up the local poker table. The people who pulling this off, the first thing is like, somebody has some big kahunas, because you come at this collectible people.
Estimates of how much was taken is at least $1 million, but who knows how much was taken, because these people came there to gamble. Did 100 people that each brought 10,000. That's $1 million right there, not to mention the jewelry.
The aftermath of that, when another OG, the OG Tyrone Stevens, who you can see on the channel, we interviewed on about a month ago, 2 months ago. He was a confidence man, but he was at a high level doing the con game and doing his pitch and drop hustle. He was running with the heavy hitters and hanging out party.
And they were brought to this house thinking they were going to gamble. They were all robbed. So Cadillac Richie, the character played by Terrence Robert, didn't need to set up this robbery. He wasn't a desperate person. And the who's who of the black underworld was there. Not just New York, but Philly, Baltimore, D.C., Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles. In fact, if the feds had better intelligence gathering and analysis capabilities at the time, they could have rounded up most of the old Black Mafia that had formed in the mid-'60s and were vacuuming in hundreds of millions in drug profits and numbers monies off the streets of inner-city America. And so the robbery, like I said, started at 10 a.m. They had a guy in the front yard with a walkie-talkie, and they made one of the hosts of the party sit in a lawn chair out front. So it looked like, everything was okay. The guys had shotguns just for intimidation. But remember, Moulton said one guy had a silencer. He surmised that was Fast Eddie, the Undertaker, because if someone was going to be whacked, they didn't want to use the shotgun to be noisy. That was to intimidate people. He was the one that was actually going to pop somebody's top if they got out of line. And he finishes his description of Cadillac Richard Wheeler and Fast Eddie Parker as they were nothing Robin Hoodie about these two guys. They were rough. They took care of people who gave them trouble. And like when they killed Bulletproof, they killed some girl that was a bystander too by mistake. Now, of course, there were several other people that were with them and did the robbery. Some of them got found down in Georgia. I think 2 of them were found killed in Georgia. And then a couple were found killed in the Bronx. And as for Cadillac Richard and Fast Eddie, well, they were the last 2 standing. And Cadillac Richard was actually living with a woman, an Italian woman, who had left her husband, who had been high-ranking in the New York State Department of Corrections, who was a square, but she's living with this guy. And one day, Fast Eddie comes and says, "Yo, I need some help getting something out the car." Richard goes downstairs. Cadillac Richard, pop, pop. Fast Eddie buffed him off. The Black Mafia had gotten to, Frank Moulton maybe, had gotten to Fast Eddie and knew he was maybe the only guy they could have got his partner, Richard, so they paid him to do that. And then Fast Eddie was wanted up and down the East Coast for all sorts of homicides, robberies. He kind of, what happened to him? Fast Eddie got caught. Oh, he was going to be bumped off on the street. He got caught in a cab with a grenade he got caught in a cab with a gun like a few weeks after that. Now, couldn't really follow his trail as to whether he cut a deal with the feds. He went to federal prison. Not sure. I would imagine Who knows? Really hard to know. It would be interesting to know. So that's what happened to people that did the big heist. But Cadillac Richard, adrenaline junkie, these guys already had a lot of money and they set up this heist. Recurring theme, upcoming documentary, Beyond Street Dreams. There's two kind of people at the top of the food chain in the streets. Those are in it for the money, and some are in it for violence. Some are in it for thrills, and even the people that are in it for money are definitely in it for some thrills. So, an audacious robbery of the who's who of it would have been like robbing. If the mafia had a thing where all the bosses of all the families came and you robbed it all. When they broke in the house of one mob boss in Chicago, 9 bodies got dropped behind that. So you can imagine. So everyone in the heist, as far as we know, got bumped off, except Fast Eddie, who got taken into custody before he could. And as for Frank Moulton, he was convicted along with a guy, Frank Moulton of Englewood, New Jersey, Angel Rodriguez of Miami, William Hightower of Washington, D.C., 2 women, Yvonne Chenault of Chicago and Lois Sampson of D.C., were also convicted. Then the prosecutors said they had been found guilty of a conspiracy and the distribution of more than 150 pounds of coke and more than 26 pounds of heroin. That's just what they got found guilty of. Several $100 million in street value. But Frank Moulton, kind of a Frank Matthews type of guy, but he got 25 years. He sat down and gave an interview about this. True, George plucked him because he didn't have nothing else to do. Of course, he didn't admit he had anything to do with anybody getting killed, but so some real hardcore people. It wasn't all glitz and glamour. In fact, very little of it is glitz and glamour in Underworld. It's just a part you see or hear about in a song or in a movie. But Fast Eddie and Cadillac Richard Wheeler were deadly, and Harlem was deadly. And everyone in this caper ended up dead, and Frank Moulton ended up with 25 years. And I think he died in prison, but I'm not sure. Our Prophet American know.
So when he tells the same story the way Mickey told it, that there was all the heavy hitters was there, he didn't explain that it was a string of maybe up to 8, 9 homicides that end up happening to people who from that life that were all supposedly related to, as you can imagine, you can't rob 100 tier 1 hustlers.
Atlanta, which was now on the map as a major black cultural center after Ali Quarry. Even though there was that robbery in 70, Frank Matthews used it in 71 to have a real summit specifically to discuss the dope business and to tell all the major dealers that they weren't going to have to deal with the Italians anymore because he was in the process of securing a large and permanent pipeline of his own, which really would have marked a true Black Mafia like the Italians in the sense you could have, hey, I'm from Detroit, or someone in Chicago or Cleveland or Akron, Ohio, or North Carolina that I can call on to help me out and settle disputes, and we all work together and we operate away from the Italians. That was Frank Matthews' dream, at least. And Frank Matthews also owned, he must have had his claws into politics down there because he owned land that he bought that nobody was supposed to know, turned into, I think, I-75 federal highway. So Frank Matthews would have been a millionaire legally just from that land deal, but of course he got indicted and disappeared first. So Atlanta is the center of a lot of big gangster action, including that of Frank Matthews, who had a summit there and owned a lot of land there. Someone in the state government must have gave him a heads up of what was going to happen.
Frank Matthews at that time, I think, was probably under 30 years old, was extremely bright, had good leadership skills, and had convened a meeting of all of the top African-American and Hispanic drug dealers in Atlanta, Georgia, in 1971. And his goal was to unite and form a family where they cut out the Italian mafia and went right to the source of heroin and brought it in and controlled the distribution.
Miami, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Atlanta, similar information was coming back. Some guy named Matthews was behind the local organizations in those cities. He was in a league of his own, and he was a top, not only an organizer, but a businessman. He saw himself as that. He posed as a real estate developer, which was a front, but he bought a whole series of parcels of land where he was informed the federal highway was going to go in. Had that gone through, he would have been a multi-millionaire just on the real estate.
He always had the African Americans involved in the distribution of drugs throughout the inner cities. And in the 70s, it's when African Americans were becoming more prominent in business. The drug dealers wanted to do the same thing. And it just made business sense from their perspective to cut out the middleman, which would have been the Italian mafia, and go right to the source and import heroin and control the distribution.
Let's face it, they couldn't believe that this black guy, was working in 21 states, with this huge network, and people were coming from all over the country to buy dope from him.
At Ali's really big fight, which happened in 1971, Ali Frazier won at Madison Square Garden. Frank Lucas put himself on the public radar with wearing his chinchilla hat, but Eddie Jackson and his Detroit crew, their photo was in the same Jet magazine as Frank Lucas's. Frank Lucas had one photo. Him and his whole crew had the whole top half of the page. Eddie had come out there in 10 Cadillacs. He was supposed to meet a plug. The plug he was supposed to meet kind of fell through, but he ended up bumping into some Italians while shopping at the clothing store in New York, getting ready for the fight. And they said, "Hey, you look like you're in the same business as us." And this Italian was a guy named Doc Lombardozzi, who was the point man for the Gambinos, who were all through the 70s still bringing in the big bag from Europe. And
Ali's prior fight to that, the Jerry Corey fight, leads to all these hustlers getting robbed and sends shockwaves through the black underworld. But maybe none of it happens if Ali doesn't start back fighting again in 1970.
It's amazing how fast society can change at certain times and in certain ways. Think about this. In 1965, just 5 years before this fight in Atlanta, so many black people were being deprived of their basic constitutional right to vote in southern states. The federal government was forced to pass the Voting Rights Act, enforcing those rights. Interracial dating would get you arrested, if not worse, in a lot of places. Jim Crow was still in full effect. 3 years after that, 1968, the Black Panthers are having shootouts with the police all over the place. And yet, 2 years after that, 1970, Black Panthers are in decline. Black power is in decline, at least as a social movement, and a Superfly era is set to begin.
But they make us dream about owning a Rolls Royce and an Eldorado. Superfly. Shaft in Harlem. Shaft in Africa. Shaft meeting with the Jew. Today, we have the movie industry saturating the black mentality with a death wish.
Criminality replaced revolution as the cool thing, at least superficially, in many elements of the black community. Now, was that a natural evolution? Was that an accident? Was it planned propaganda? Well, that's a serious and interesting question. We'll never really know that for sure, but it's something for you to think about.
A man like Eddie Jackson talking about no longer, I ain't trying to catch the streets, I'm trying to catch Rockefeller. That I'm so far away from yes sir and yes ma'am. I'm riding Cadillacs, I got diamond rings. I'm a black man flaunting my wealth in a very unapologetic way.
The face of the ghetto is the face of despair. It is a face whose eyes see only hopelessness.
68, 69, Nixon takes over in 68. We talked about, without getting deep into political science, maybe the Nixon administration took seeing black men empowered who are not fight the power, down with the man, wearing berets, that we need to phase out that Huey Newton look.
More black ownership of business and land and homes can be the multiplier of pride that will end our racial strife. The black man's pride is the white man's hope.
On the political side, Richard Nixon's stated policy of supporting black business, to quote Tricky Dick, the black man's pride is the white man's hope.
And these Negroes, unwittingly, driving their big Cadillacs and wearing their fur coats with all the diamonds,